Hello, I'm Esther Gidhu. It's Tuesday, July 11th. This is Africa 54. U.S. President Joe Biden is in Lithuania at the NATO summit, and he is hailing NATO's agreement to admit Sweden to the defense alliance. But first, President Biden met with the British Prime Minister in London, where cluster bombs were a key topic of conversation. The Intergovernmental Authority on Development meets in Ethiopia to kickstart a peace process in hopes of ending the conflict in Sudan. And Benin and Mali have halted a major public health problem, but Mali's work in eliminating and eradicating neglected tropical diseases continues. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. U.S. President Joe Biden on Tuesday is enthusiastic over the agreement for Sweden to join NATO. President Biden is in Lithuania for the NATO meetings and described the summit as, quote, historic moment. The president also says the United States agrees with a proposal yet to be released publicly to outline a path for Ukraine's eventual membership into the defense alliance. VOA White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara is traveling with the president, where he first stopped in London.
U.S. President Joe Biden and other NATO leaders are in Vilnius for a two-day meeting hosted by Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda.
The fact that we are meeting in the neighborhood of an aggressor sends a strong signal of our unity and resolve. We are united and will defend every inch of the alliance.
Before Vilnius, Biden made a brief stop in London. He said relations with Britain were rock solid as he met with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, their sixth meeting in 6 months.
We met in San Diego, Belfast, Hiroshima, Washington, here, and couldn't be meeting with a closer friend and a greater ally.
But talks were overshadowed by Biden's recent decision to send cluster munitions to Ukraine, despite the bombs being banned by 123 nations, including Britain, for their indiscriminate killing capability. Still, Sunak sought to present unity ahead of the NATO summit.
Where we stand as two of the firmest allies in that alliance, and I know we'll want to do everything we can to strengthen Euro-Atlantic security.
Allied leaders will seek the right balance to satisfy those who want Ukraine to be admitted to the alliance sooner and those who worry that a fast track for Kyiv will mean a NATO war with Russia.
It is for the allies and Ukraine to decide when the time is right to invite Ukraine to be a full member. The most urgent task now is to ensure that Ukraine prevails as a sovereign and independent nation in Europe, because unless Ukraine prevails, then there is no membership issue to be discussed at all.
Before Vilnius, Biden also met with King Charles III at Windsor Castle to discuss climate financing for developing nations. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, London.
Human Rights Watch on Tuesday is calling for the International Criminal Court to investigate atrocities in Sudan's Darfur region, including what it says were summary executions of 28 non-Arab tribesmen by the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. Meanwhile, members of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development are meeting in Ethiopia in hopes of bringing peace to Sudan. VOA's Paul Ndiho has more.
Sudan is refusing to participate in the regional meeting aimed at resolving the conflict. Instead, it's accusing Kenya, which is chairing the talks, of favoring rival forces. Sudan's foreign ministry says that its delegation will not participate until its request to remove Kenya as chair is met. However, Kenyan President William Ruto remains hopeful.
We know that the political leaders present in this meeting are by no means representative of the groups, but we believe that an open process, an inclusive process, will bring on board all political actors, civilian groups, civil society groups, to be part of this great effort.
Approximately 3,000 people have been killed since mid-April when fighting erupted between Sudan's top generals, while nearly 3 million have been forced to flee their homes, according to UN estimates.
The parties to the violent conflict will have to silence the guns and immediately put in place an unconditional and indefinite ceasefire.
Analysts said the conflict-torn Sudan is on the brink of a full-scale civil war that could destabilize the entire region. The US State Department supports the IGAD's initiative in Ethiopia.
This meeting continues to send the message we have been sending to the two warring parties from the beginning, that the world is watching. The United States and our regional partners are unified in calling for the parties to immediately end the fighting and for the SAF and RSF to return to the barracks, to adhere to their obligations under international humanitarian law.
Also on Tuesday, the United Nations Food Agency says Darfur residents are still fleeing, including more than 20,000 refugees who crossed into the Chadian border town of Andre in the last week. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
And we're going to circle back to the NATO summit, which opened Tuesday with fresh momentum after Turkey withdrew its objections to Sweden. But more work remains to be determined, a path forward for Ukraine's future with the alliance. And for the very latest on the NATO meetings in Lithuania, let's go live now to Associated Press international correspondent Philip Crowther, who is standing by in Vilnius. Philip, bring us up to speed on Tuesday's meetings. But let's talk first about President Zelensky's arrival at that city where you are. And he wants NATO membership for Ukraine. Will he get it?
In a word, no. We've heard from Ukrainian President Zelensky on his way here to Vilnius. He is now here in town and will be taking part in meetings tomorrow, Wednesday. He earlier said on Twitter that he thought these negotiations that had happened here today about Ukraine's possible membership status within NATO were, quote, absurd. What he wanted was a clear timeline for Ukraine to join the military alliance. In the end, what he is getting from NATO is an invitation to join, but only if conditions are met and only if all allied countries agree. That's all 32 countries very soon, with Sweden joining the military alliance very soon as well. Baltic countries, including Lithuania, where we are here for the summit, also Poland, would have liked to have seen Ukraine join a lot quicker, but all members of NATO will clearly agree with one problem here. If Ukraine was to join NATO right now, then essentially NATO would be at war with Russia almost immediately. Why? Because of Article 5 within the NATO Charter, which essentially says that an attack on one country would be an attack on all, meaning that all countries would have to militarily come to the defense of Ukraine immediately. And that is what NATO's current member countries do not want to do.
Sweden is set to become the next NATO member state, but only if Turkey agrees. What are the implications here?
Well, Turkey has now agreed. Sweden will become the 32nd member state of NATO, and we expect that to happen pretty soon over the next few weeks. There has to be ratification in the Turkish parliament, and we do expect that to happen pretty soon indeed. Now, it took a while for Turkey to get to this position. It has been saying that Sweden harbors Kurdish militants, for example. But on the eve of this NATO summit, Turkey finally agreed that it would get rid of its own obstacle to Sweden's NATO membership. Finland, already a new NATO member country, by the way, since Russia's invasion of Ukraine began. Now, how does this deal come about, though, is a question that we haven't got the answers to yet. What does Turkey get in return to getting rid of this obstacle for Sweden to join NATO? At one point, Turkish President Erdogan mentioned that he might want the Turkey's European Union membership to be facilitated. But for the two to come together seems like a very difficult agreement to come to. There's another part of this story, and that is that Turkey wants F-16 fighter jets from the United States. And it would appear that that is something that the Biden administration has very much agreed to. There was a bilateral meeting between Presidents Biden and Erdogan that finished just a few minutes ago here in Vilnius.
Philip, thank you very much for your reporting. Philip Crowther is Associated Press International Correspondent, reporting live for us from Vilnius, Lithuania. We're going to circle back now to Sudan's peace talks, and I'm joined right here in the studio by Sama Salman, Sudanese strategic analyst and president of the U.S. Educated Sudanese Association. Sama, it's always good to have you back with us on Africa 54.
Thank you, Esther. It's always great to be with you.
So let's start off with the conversation going on. What do you make of the U.S., IGAD, AU's efforts to hold peace talks about Sudan's war, despite Burhan's faction saying we're not going to participate?
Okay, well, I mean, Esther, yesterday, the UN humanitarian chief, Martin Griffiths, said that Sudan is in a civil war of the most brutal kind. He also said that today Sudan is the most difficult, it's the toughest spot in the world for humanitarian workers. So this tells you just how desperate and how challenging the situation in Sudan is. I believe that the U.S. coming together with the IGAD and the African Union is absolutely a step in the right direction. What we don't want to see is different competing diplomatic tracks. We don't want to see different competing agendas, political agendas. What we want to see is one unified, strong coalition of the international community coming together in the interest of stopping the war in Sudan.
And so why did the Burhan faction decide that they're not going to participate? What happened there?
Well, General Burhan, as we know, is the commander of the Sudanese armed forces. So he's one side of the Sudanese war. And he claims that he is upset with the fact that IGAD has equated the regular army or the Sudanese armed forces with the paramilitary, which is led by General Hemeti. He believes he's actually the sovereign leader of Sudan and in charge of the Sudanese government. So he doesn't like, being equated with Hemeti. He believes Hemeti is a rebel force and should be called a rebel force. And he's basically saying that Hemeti is favored by President Ruto of Kenya. And so that's really where the problem lies.
They feel like Ruto's taking sides here? We'll find out. But then let's talk about the what can possibly be achieved in this war by bringing, all these parties to come and discuss what's happening in Khartoum, but especially contributing a regional force to be, stationed in Khartoum.
Well, at the IGAD meeting yesterday, there was a discussion, as you've pointed out, of the possibility of bringing an East African force to Sudan. That would basically be a peacekeeping force. So that's built on the premise that you have a permanent cessation of hostilities. Now, we've often heard the African Union talk about silencing the guns. And we've heard the African Union talk about African solutions for African problems. So absolutely, I think that an East African force is an essential part of this equation. I think that it's part of a broader strategy, though. You have to end the war in Sudan first. The only way you can do that is have a clear strategy that combines a no-fly zone, expanding the arms embargo from Darfur to the entirety of Sudan, and asset freezes that ensure that the licit and illicit flows in and out of Sudan by the generals that they use to smuggle in weapons is put to an end.
Now, as a native of Sudan, you've been involved in what we can call channel diplomacy here in Washington. Can you share with us about this channel diplomacy?
Well, yes, I've been involved in back channel diplomacy with the U.S. government, agencies, with the State Department, USAID, different embassies here in the Washington, D.C. area. And I'm part of a group. I'm part of a team, actually, that does that. And we work on specific policy recommendations that we put forward to the U.S. government and other international bodies. And I would say that this is a privilege and a responsibility we have residing here in the United States, and it's part of being in a living, breathing democracy. And I would say that it has absolutely been effective. I think that we've seen very small incremental steps at first that were not noticeable, but here today on day 88 of the Sudan war, we can absolutely see that we've made a dent in policy.
Sama, thank you very much.
Thank you, Esther.
Sama Salman is a Sudanese strategic analyst and president of the U.S. Educated Sudanese Association. The United Nations estimates that of the world's 8 billion population, India is now home to 1.4 billion people. India at some point is expected to surpass China in population. The UN believes this could be any time now, but demographers say it may already have happened. According to the United Nations, China's population will continue to fall and drop below 1 billion before the end of this century. Africa has the fastest growing and youngest population, according to Tigis Tamare, the deputy director of the Africa program at the Chatham House think tank in London.
Population growth is, of course, partly explained by improvement in level and access to public health that has led to decrease in child mortality. And that by itself is good news. And the other good news is that also by having a young population, most African nations do not have the burden of a large elderly population that relies on taxes and pensions, which can be a strain on the economy as well.
Amare also believes that Africa's youth will also be a key to its long-term security and prosperity despite climate change. Let us know what you think about Africa 54 and still to come. A look into a U.S. women-owned car repair business. We'll be right back.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, 31 leaders of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, gather for a crucial summit in Lithuania this week. Russia's war in Ukraine and Kyiv's fully fledged NATO membership will top the agenda. But how will the decisions made at this summit affect Africa as a region? And what does this gathering reveal about how much say countries in the global south have on matters of international stability, security, and major military alliances? Join me, Heidi Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
From around the world. Let's go.
In other African news, a local rights group says Tunisia has moved hundreds of migrants to shelters after criticism of conditions in a desolate Sahara military area on the border with Libya, where the government transferred them last week. Tunisia is struggling with high numbers of mainly sub-Saharan African migrants seeking to leave the North African country for Europe. Egypt signs contracts to sell stakes in state assets worth nearly $2 billion as part of a program to boost the private sector and raise Cair's hard currency. And Senegalese photographer Amy Shah clicked the shutter of her vintage Pentax camera, capturing the light of the horizon on color film purchased from the country's only developer. Shah says Dakar looks great with certain colored films because they really bring out the warm, vibrant colors. Dana Greenstreet is a tenacious automotive mechanic and a vital part of Virginia Tire and Auto, one of the largest women-owned car repair businesses in Washington, D.C. area. Having defiantly entered a male-dominated industry a decade ago, Dana keeps breaking barriers with a continuous learning and adaptability, inspiring a change in thinking in the sector. VOA's Faiza El Masri has the story.
My name is Dana Greenstreet. I am an automotive mechanic. I've been doing this for about 10 years now. I have 2 kids. I'm engaged. I'm trying to see if I see any coolant leaks at the moment. My pressure is going down, but I don't see any leaks. I guess when I get tickets like this that are leak checks, I get curious because you can't see them all the time immediately, and it can always be different as to what failed this time, so it's a bit of a different puzzle every time that you're trying to solve. I started with Virginia Tire in 2014, so I've gone on and off, but this has been my home base.
So I wanted to introduce you all to Dana. She is one of our star technicians at Gainesville. She's the real deal, and what's really cool is that she also teaches as one of the lab teachers at Nova in the Auto Tech program in the evenings. And
that's cool.
It's cool. I love your story.
Which part?
The part where someone in your family told you couldn't do this?
Everybody told me I couldn't. Everybody told me that women didn't belong in the shop, that I couldn't do it. That girls couldn't be mechanics. And I said, okay, let's see. I'm gonna do it. And here I am. I was first interested in cars when I was a little girl. I would help my dad out and change the oils in the cars and things like that. Then when I was about 25, I moved back to Northern Virginia so that I could go to college, so that I could become an automotive mechanic, so that I could learn to work on cars, so that I could learn to rebuild an engine if I wanted to, or a transmission if I wanted to. When I came here, I think initially probably people were kind of apprehensive. Is she going to last? Is she going to be able to do her job? Is there going to be a whole bunch of problems? And we all just kind of meshed together really well. They're used to me now. They don't have anything really, they won't say anything to me that they won't say to one of the other guys. Okay. Always learning. There's not a day that goes by that I don't see something new that I haven't seen. We're going from internal combustion engines to a lot of electric vehicles now, and that is a huge, major change in the way everything works. There is always that opportunity, and there is always that chance to prove yourself, and there is always a reason to go try it if you're interested. Just go try.
It's time for Health Report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu. Hello, Lino.
Hello, Esther. It's good to be here. Hello, everyone. Experts say climate change is impacting and favoring the spread of mosquito-borne diseases like malaria and dengue by creating optimal conditions for the development of viruses. Luis Fernando Chavez is Associate Professor in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health in the School of Public Health at Indiana University. He shares some tips on how to avoid mosquito-borne diseases this summer.
Need to be done, like one is using, for example, appropriate clothing when going into natural environments like forested areas and stuff, like not going with shorts, using appropriate boots, using appropriate long sleeves, to protect yourself from mosquito landing on your skin. So basically, if you have like a long sleeve shirt, the mosquito is unlikely to bite, for example, on your arm. The other thing that can be done is using repellents, using clothing that has repellent into the clothing. That's another thing that even has been approved by the EPA. At the level of your household, things that people can do within their household, within their gardens, is checking for larval habitats and eliminating them. So looking for places that might have water containers that are unattended that can develop the larvae of the mosquitoes. And this includes checking the house gutters, making sure that there are no leaks, that there are no water accumulating, that there are no larvae, checking other discarded containers that might be in the backyard, like changing the water in the pools, for example, can reduce this production of mosquitoes. And then the third thing that can be done is more at the community level, that is doing this type of actions, but at the community level, looking into the public spaces, trying to reduce the amount of containers that can serve as larval habitat for mosquitoes,
The World Health Organization certified in May that the countries of Benin and Mali have eliminated trachoma as a public health problem, the 5th and 6th African countries to do so, as VOA's Kane Farboth reports. While the Carter Center is celebrating the milestone in Mali, its work in eliminating and eradicating trachoma in Ethiopia, Niger, South Sudan, and Sudan continues.
The leading cause of preventable blindness in the world. And
the Carter Center was already a decade into its fight against guinea worm globally, when former President Jimmy Carter and his global nonprofit took on another neglected tropical disease in the African nation of Mali. Kelly Callahan is the director of the Carter Center's Trachoma Control Program.
25 to 50% of the children between the ages of 1 and 9 in all areas of Mali suffered from the beginning stages of this disease.
It was a statistic Callahan says troubled Carter.
The Hilton Foundation asked President Carter and the Carter Center, would we be willing to consider working on sanitation and water to combat this disease called trachoma in Mali and Niger?
The Carter Center set a goal of eliminating the disease in both countries.
for eyes, no trichiasis.
Trachoma can be transmitted through infected discharge from the eyes and nose.
This disease is preventable. A bacterial infection that stems from access or lack of access to water and sanitation, poor living conditions, socioeconomically stressed populations.
Since 1998, the Carter Center and its partners have funded and staffed programs with host nations to develop strategies that both treat and prevent infections, even during Mali's recent armed conflict. The Carter Center believes its program in Mali has helped avert blindness in more than 5 million people, and the antibiotics used to combat trachoma also help prevent infant mortality.
The elimination of trachoma as a public health problem in Mali is no less than Herculean.
Sadi Musa, the Carter Center's senior representative in Mali, believes the success of his organization's trachoma program could boost efforts to combat other neglected tropical diseases like guinea worm.
This also will help us, with donors, to show them that we are serious in what we are doing, and we can convince them to get more resources.
While President Carter has retired from public life and is receiving hospice care at his home in Plains, Georgia, Callahan says they keep him up to date on recent developments in Mali.
And we heard that President Carter was just thrilled beyond belief. So we're very excited that he knows.
Callahan says while Mali's elimination milestone is important, the Carter Center's work in Africa is far from over.
We work in 5 countries, including Mali. Those 5 countries have the worst known trachoma in the world.
The World Health Organization says trachoma remains in 23 African countries, and approximately 105 million people on the continent live in areas